And we are back for prepping for winter with the second Arianne sample chapter. In our previous parts, Arianne went on a quest to find Bittersteel's legacy, the Golden Company, off in the Stormlands, where misinformation is everywhere. Her posse had an adventure in a cave of the Children of the Forest, and now they have made it to Mistwood, and have been met by two sergeants, Mud and Chain. And now let's continue. At evenfall, a fine supper was served to them in the Solar, high in the Tower of Owls, where they were joined by the Dowager Lady Mertens and her maester. Though a captive in her own castle, the old woman seemed spry and cheerful. "My sons and grandsons went off when Lord Renly called his banners," she told the princess and her party. "I have not seen them since, though from time to time they send a raven. One of my grandsons took a wound at the Blackwater, but he's since recovered. I expect they will return here soon enough to hang this lot of thieves." She waved a duck leg at Mud and Chain across the table. So we meet Lady Mertens, the dowager left in charge of Mistwood, who apparently surrendered to the Golden Company quite quickly and without bloodshed. There is not much revealed about the Mertens. We have no idea who Lady Mertens was before her marriage, and we don't know where her sons and grandsons are. The house supported Renly, and then, who knows? They probably bent the knee to Joffrey and then were forced to quell the Riverlands, but there's an outside chance they fled with Stannis and are all up north. Now, Lady Mertens is an older woman alone in her castle with her family missing in war, and she is somewhat playfully scolding a gang of outlaws. It's all rather reminiscent of Lady Smallwood when she hosted the Brotherhood Without Banners. And here we also start a conversation that is strikingly similar to one that the Hound had with the Brotherhood. After the Hound's gold is taken, he accuses them all of being thieves.
"We are no thieves," said Mud. "We're foragers."
"Did you buy all that food down in the yard?"
"We foraged it," said Mud. "The small folk can grow more. We serve your rightful king, old crone."
He seemed to be enjoying this.
"You should learn to speak more courteous to knights."
"If you two are knights, I'm still a maiden," said Lady Mertens. "And I'll speak as I please. What will you do? Kill me? I've lived too long already." So just like the Brotherhood Without Banners, Mud rebukes the accusation of thievery with the concept of foraging. Mud then justifies their right to forage because they serve the rightful king, which is near identical to the Brotherhood's justification for foraging because they're king's men. And of course the company is giving marks on paper just like the Brotherhood, and Mud claims that they are all knights, which Lady Mertens scoffs at. If you remember, the Hound also mocked the idea that the Brotherhood Without Banners were knights. And to top things off, Lady Mertens confronts the threat of death with indifference, which is what the Hound does with the Brotherhood Without Banners. Now, a literary parallel is not the same as a link, but I will say there is some evidence to support the idea that the Brotherhood Without Banners are Aegon supporters. One is that the group is connected to the Inn at the Crossroads, which is run by House Heddle, a prime Blackfyre supporter. But another has to do with the Brotherhood's knighthood vows. Keep in mind, a traditional knight in Westeros is linked to the Faith of the Seven. Vows are done in the name of the Seven, and a knight's head is smeared with sacred oils by a septon. The Brotherhood Without Banners, or the Knights of the Hollow Hill, are R'hllor followers and have different vows. One vow being to obey their captains, whatever that means. And of course, the Golden Company is led by captains. Now, we don't know too much about the knighting process within the Golden Company. I imagine it mostly derives from Bittersteel and the original Blackfyre Knights, though we know that Jon Con has also knighted people. However, it should be noted that the Faith of the Seven did reject Daemon Blackfyre's claim at the time, so I'm not certain how the men feel about the Faith anymore. And being exiles, it's doubtful that many of the company's knights, if any, were properly anointed by a septon. Now, on a completely different note, we should note that Mud is completely wrong about the small folk's ability to grow more crops. We know that winter has come, and the small folk will not have time for another harvest. Princess Arianne said, "Have you been treated well, my lady?" "I have not been raped, if that's what you're asking," the old woman said. "Some of the serving girls have been less fortunate. Married or unmarried, the men make no distinctions."
"No one's been doing any raping," insisted young John Mudd. "Connington won't have that. We follow orders."
Chain nodded. "Some girls was persuaded, might be." "The same way our small folk were persuaded to give you all their crops. Melons or maidenheads, it's all the same to your sort. If you want it, you take it." Lady Mertens turned to Arianne. "If you should see this Lord Connington, you tell him that I knew his mother. And she would be ashamed. So Lady Mertens is upset that the men have been having sex with the serving girls. It's a bit ambiguous whether the situation is rape by coercion or promises of some sort. The scene is a bit reminiscent of Lady Smallwood scolding Tom O'Sevens for his womanizing. Now interestingly, Mudd insists that there has not been rapes on Connington's orders, which of course goes against the idea that Connington himself was raping. Now it should be noted that Mudd just claimed to be a knight and is now claiming to obey the orders of his captain. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the knighthood vow of the Brotherhood. Perhaps I shall, the princess thought. That night, she dispatched her second raven to her father. So once again, Arianne sends out ravens after hearing bad news about the Golden Company. Remember, she sent out ravens after hearing about pillaging, rape, and war, despite later finding out that the countryside was quite peaceful. Here she seems to be believing Lady Merton's side of events and reporting on theft and rape again. It seems a very negative view of the Golden Company is being sent back to Doran. Arianne was on her way back to her own chamber when she heard muffled laughter from the adjoining room. She paused and listened for a moment, then pushed the door open to find Elia Sand curled up in a window seat, kissing Feathers. When Feathers saw the princess standing there, he jumped to his feet and began to stammer. Both of them still had their clothes on. Arianne took some comfort in that as she sent Feathers on his way with a sharp look and a go. Then she turned to Elia. He is twice your age. A serving man. He cleans up bird shit for the maester. Elia, what were you thinking? We were only kissing. I'm not going to marry him. Elia crossed her arms defiantly beneath her breasts. You think I never kissed a boy before? Feathers is a man. A serving man, but still a man. It did not escape the princess that Elia was the same age she had been when she gave her maidenhead to Daemon Sand. And here we have one of the more striking scenes of the chapter. Once again, I must stress that Elia Sand is a stand-in for Lyanna Stark. She's 14, wild, half a horse, a jouster, and a werewood. And we should remember the creepiness we experienced last chapter between Elia Sand and Joss Hood. He said that he wanted to spank her, and she responded with a thinly veiled sexual innuendo involving jousting. And of course it was creepy because children shouldn't be having sex with adults. Now there are attempts to justify a child-adult pairing by saying it's of the setting, but here we find out that no, our characters in the setting find this creepy as well. Arianne tells us that Elia is a girl and Feathers is a man, and the relationship is off. And of course, Lyanna was a girl and Rhaegar was a man. This scene with Elia Sand and Feathers shatters any notion of Rhaegar and Lyanna being a romantic tale of star-crossed lovers. Our author and the characters within the story fully recognize that it's creepy. And again, this relationship is contrasted with the genuine romantic love of Arianne and Daemon. These two did not have the power imbalance associated with age. Still, there's something else that's off about this scene. Why is Elia kissing Feathers? Joss Hood and Garibald Shells are supposed to be the handsome knights. There's nothing in the text to suggest that Feathers is especially good-looking, and he doesn't have a very glamorous vocation. Even Arianne considers him a shit shoveler. And yet this is the man that Elia chooses to pursue. Why? Now I should say that Arianne's dismissal of Feathers is likely unjustified. Feathers is an expert with the ravens, and Doran Martell clearly does not trust his maester, Maester Calliote. This means that Feathers is likely Doran's main trusted communication man. A man who's been reading Doran's mail for years. Elia is making out with a man who probably knows more about Doran's plans than anyone else in the world. And so I do wonder if Elia is purposely seducing Feathers in a spying effort. And if Elia had nefarious reasons for seducing Feathers, I do wonder if Lyanna had nefarious reasons for seducing Rhaegar. I am not your mother. Kiss all the boys you want when we return to Dorne. Here and now, though, this is no place for kisses, Elia. Meek and mild and obedient, you said. Must I add chaste as well? You swore upon your father's bones. I remember, said Elia, sounding chastened. Meek and mild and obedient. I won't kiss him again. So finally we get a sort of mention of Ellaria Sand, with Arianne saying that she's not Elia's mother. Strangely, Arianne speaks as if it's the mother's responsibility to prevent extramarital sex. In this case, Ellaria Sand would not be that person for Elia. Ellaria and Oberyn were not married, and Ellaria is a bastard herself. She reportedly was close to being a prostitute before Oberyn met her, and she worshipped a love goddess and was interested in a menage a trois with Cersei. Now, it's hard to say how much of that is true, but I would say it's safe to say that Elia Sand was raised in an environment where extramarital sex was no big deal, considering her mother was doing it and was the product of it. Now, it should be noted that although Elia may be breaking the spirit of her oath with Arianne, she hasn't really broken the letter of the law. Arianne says meek and mild and obedient, and notes that chaste may need to be added to it. But chaste hasn't been added to it, and Elia's new promise can actually be read in a rather dirty way. Elia says meek and mild and obedient, I won't kiss him again. But sex doesn't require kissing, and can certainly be done with one party being obedient. The shortest way from Mistwood to Griffin's Roost was through the green, wet heart of the rainwood, slow going at the best of times. It took Arianne and her company the better part of 8 days. They traveled to the music of steady lashing rains beating at the treetops above, though underneath the green great canopy of leaves and branches, she and her riders stayed surprisingly dry. Next we find Arianne back on the road, slow going through the Mistwood. The slow going with a line of wagons is somewhat reminiscent of Stannis' march to Winterfell, and of course on that march Asha spends her time trying to charm Justin Massey. We have a similar situation here with Arianne trudging towards Griffin's Roost and trying to charm Chain. Now again, we don't know what's in these wagons, but I imagine they contain the crops that the company has been collecting. Chain accompanied them for the first 4 days of their journey north, with a line of wagons and 10 men of his own. Away from Mud, he proved more forthcoming, and Arianne was able to charm his life story out of him. His proudest boast was of a great-grandsire who had fought with the Black Dragon on the red grass field and crossed the narrow sea with Bittersteel. Chain himself had been born into the company, fathered on a camp follower by his sellsword father. Though he had been raised to speak the common tongue and think of himself as Westerosi, he had never set foot in any part of the Seven Kingdoms till now. So as Asha did with Justin Massey, Arianne is somewhat successful in charming Chain. She has finally found a man she can control again after Balon Swan, Daemon Sand, and young John Mudd were not too susceptible to her charms. If Elia is a spy, it would be ironic that Arianne was scolding her for her behavior, as using feminine charms to gather intelligence is exactly what Arianne is doing. So we get a bit more about Chain's family history, but it's very difficult to extract very much information from it. Chain's ancestor fought at the Battle of the Redgrass Field, survived, and crossed the narrow sea with Bittersteel. Now we know the names of some great Blackfyre sympathizers who fought at the Redgrass Field, such as Robb Rayne, Gareth the Grey, Sir Aubrey Ambrose, Lord Gorman Peake, Black Byron Flowers, Red Tusk, and Fireball. Though none of these names really connect to Chain very well. I will say that Fireball's real name was Quentin Ball, and it would be fitting if he was friends with a guy named Chain, making them Ball and Chain. Fireball himself died at the Battle of the Redgrass Field, and if he had a friend named Chain, it could be anyone. Now there is also Red Tusk, who sounds like he could have a boar for a sigil, which would make him a Crakehall. And the Crakehalls are known for being huge, much like Chain. So perhaps Chain is descended from Red Tusk, though that wouldn't really explain why Chain is going around using chains as whips, looking like an Umber sigil. A sad tale, and a familiar one, Arianne thought. His life was all of a piece. A long list of places where he'd fought, foes he'd faced and slain, wounds he'd taken. The princess would let him talk, from time to time prompting him with a laugh, a touch, or a question, pretending to be fascinated. She learned more than she would ever need to know about Mudd's skill with dice, two swords, and his fondness for red-haired women, the time someone made off with Harry Strickland's favorite elephant, Little Pussy and his lucky cat, and the other feats and foibles of the men and officers of the Golden Company. But on the 4th day, in an unguarded moment, Chain let slip a, "Once we have Storm's End." So we get into Arianne's intelligence gathering techniques, laughing, touching, questioning, listening. We know Elia Sand was at least doing the former two with feathers, and I suspect the latter two as well. We find out that Mudd is skilled at dice, which doesn't tell us very much except for maybe he's a little sharp, and we learn of a man named Two Swords. We have no idea who this is. There is only one sigil out there with 2 swords on it, and that's House Faring. It seems like a real long shot that 2 swords would be a Faring. That said, the implications of 2 swords being a Faring would be absolutely enormous, as Gilbert Faring currently holds Storm's End. And we also hear of a man named Little Pussy. Now, Quentin Ball was the father of a hedge knight named Glendon Flowers, the Knight of the Pussy Willows. That said, Sir Glendon did not have a great experience with the Blackfires, so I don't see his progeny joining the company. Little Pussy does own a cat, so perhaps his sigil is something feline. Both House Rain and House Osgrey have lions as their sigil, and were big Blackfire supporters. It's uncertain how much other good information Arianne has collected on the Golden Company. It may come in handy later on. The princess let the aside go without comment, though it gave her considerable pause. Storm's End. This griffin is a bold one, it would seem, or else a fool. The seat of House Baratheon for 3 centuries, of the ancient Storm Kings for thousands of years before that. Storm's End was said to be impregnable. Arianne had heard men argue about which was the strongest castle in the realm. Some said Casterly Rock, some the Eyrie of the Arryns, some Winterfell in the frozen north, but Storm's End was always mentioned too. So here Chane reveals to Arianne the Golden Company's intention to take Storm's End. Now, we know all of this information already from Jon Con's chapter, The Griffin Reborn. And we know that Jon Con is going to try to take the castle by trickery. We just don't know how exactly. Arianne's reaction, though, is more important. Taking Storm's End is a sign of strength and boldness. It sends the message, although false, that the Golden Company is powerful. And with this, there is hope that others will rally to their banners. Legend said it was raised by Brandon the Builder to withstand the fury of a vengeful god. Its curtain walls were the highest and strongest in all the 7 kingdoms, 40 to 80 feet in thickness. Its mighty windowless drum tower stood less than half as tall as the high tower of Old Town, but rose straight up in place of being stepped, with walls thrice as thick as those to be found in Old Town. No siege tower was tall enough to reach Storm's End battlements. Neither Mangonel nor Trebuchet could hope to breach its massive walls. So here we get some background on Storm's End, much of it repeated from Catelyn, Courtney Penrose, and other people's descriptions of the castle back in A Clash of Kings. There are a couple differences though. Arianne says the drum tower is windowless, while Cat says it's only windowless on its seaward side. Arianne says that Storm's End was built by Brandon the Builder, while Cat says it was built by Durin Godsgrief, with Brandon the Builder merely advising him as a small boy. Additionally, Arianne mentions only 1 god's wrath instead of 2. Now I will say, having Brandon the Builder build the castle and having only 1 god in the story are some very odd differences, as Arianne just recalled the story of Durin Godsgrief and the Wrath of Gods earlier in this very chapter. I guess once again Arianne is just really bad at history. Does Connington think to mount a siege? She wondered. How many men can he have? Long before the castle fell, the Lannisters would dispatch an army to break any such siege. That way is hopeless too. That night when she told Sir Daemon what Chane had said, the bastard of God's grace seemed as perplexed as she was. Storm's End was still held by men loyal to Lord Stannis when last I heard. You would think Connington might do better to make common cause with another rebel, rather than making war upon him too. So here Arianne is trying to puzzle out how Jon Con could possibly take Storm's End, a puzzle that we will eventually try to solve in a future video. The answer is clearly not an assault, which would be impossible, and it's clearly not a siege, which would be broken quickly. Now all of this we already knew from Jon Con, and Arianne and Daemon haven't figured out that he's going to use trickery of some sort. Now the two are a bit puzzled why Jon Con is trying to take Storm's End and not aligning himself with Stannis, and of course this situation is rather similar to Stannis' decision to not align himself with the Ironborn and take Deepwood Motte. In both situations, Stannis and Jon Con chose not to make a common cause with other usurpers, but instead to act like legitimate rulers to rally people to their cause. Stannis is too far away to be of help to him, Arianne mused. Capturing a few minor castles whilst their lords and garrisons are off at distant wars, that's one thing. But if Lord Connington and his pet dragon can somehow take one of the great strongholds of the realm would have to take them seriously, Sir Daemon finished. And some of those who do not love the Lannisters might well come flocking to their banners. And so Arianne and Daemon correctly puzzle out Jon Con's motive, but they still haven't figured out his method. Interestingly, Arianne mentions Jon Con and his pet dragon. There is some ambiguity here. Does she mean Aegon? Or is she open to the possibility that Jon Con has a real dragon and hopes to take the castle with it? After all, it would explain his boldness. And thinking a dragon exists that doesn't exist would be another possible interpretation of a mummer's dragon, something that both the House of the Undying and Quaithe said would be in the future. By taking Storm's End, Jon Con may fool people into thinking he actually possesses a real dragon when he doesn't, and that could actually rally people to him. That night, Arianne penned another short note to her father and had Feathers send it on its way with her third raven. And lastly, Arianne sends off her third raven, certainly communicating the move on Storm's End, but possibly also communicating the possibility of a dragon. Once again, she's probably communicating bad information, as it's not until the next day that she clears up the fact that there is no dragon. And this is a good place to stop. We'll see you guys in Arianne II, Part 5.